Jake Carter had seen and debunked it all. Ghosts, UFOs, cryptids. But something about the Mothman legend drew him to Point Pleasant. Maybe it was the chilling accounts, or perhaps the undeniable terror in the eyes of those who claimed to have seen it. With Emma Greene, a local historian and somewhat of an eccentric, by his side, he arrived in the town as the sun set, casting long, ominous shadows. Sheriff Thomas Hale met them at the old courthouse. His face was etched with lines of worry, his eyes carrying the weight of decades of unsolved mysteries and unexplained deaths. "You're wasting your time," he said gruffly. "But if you're here, you might as well know that people are scared. Something's out there." Emma's eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and fear. "What exactly have they been seeing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Red eyes in the dark, wings that blot out the moon, and death, always death," Hale replied, his voice trailing off as he looked towards the distant woods. Their first stop was the TNT area. The cold, still air was heavy with the scent of decay, and the dense forest around the bunkers seemed to swallow sound itself. Old Man Harris, who had lived as a hermit in a shack nearby, agreed to meet them. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow and distant. "I saw it back in '66, he muttered, his voice trembling. "It ain't just a creature. It's an omen. It brings death." Jake, ever the skeptic, pressed for details. "What did it look like? How did you survive?" Harris's eyes grew wild. "It's not about seeing it. It's about what it makes you see."
"Your worst nightmares come to life."
"And survival? It's a curse, not a blessing." Emma shuddered, gripping her flashlight tighter. The night was closing in, and the forest seemed alive with whispers. As they ventured deeper, they stumbled upon the entrance of one of the old bunkers. The door, rusted and half open, creaked ominously as they pushed it further. Inside, the air was thick and suffocating. The walls were covered in strange, indecipherable markings. Emma traced them with her fingers, feeling a chill run down her spine. "These are warnings," she said, "ancient symbols to ward off evil." A sudden screech echoed through the bunker, followed by a flurry of wings. The beam of Jake's flashlight caught the briefest glimpse of something, large, dark, and with eyes that glowed a hellish red. Then, it was gone, leaving only silence and the oppressive darkness. Their next stop was the remains of the Silver Bridge. The air was heavy with the past, the ghosts of those who perished in the collapse seeming to linger. Sheriff Hale joined them, his face ashen. "Do you believe now?" he asked Jake, who was unusually quiet. Jake nodded slowly. "I don't know what I saw, but it's real, and it's dangerous." Emma was deep in thought. The bridge, it's more than a site of tragedy. It's a gateway, a place where our world and something else intersect. As night fell, the air grew colder, and a thick fog rolled in. The three stood in the middle of the bridge, listening to the eerie silence. Suddenly, the fog parted, and there it was, the Mothman. Its wings spread wide, eyes burning like coals in the darkness. The creature let out a bone-chilling screech, and the ground beneath them trembled. Hale drew his gun, but Emma stopped him. "You can't kill it. It's not a creature. It's an entity." Before they could react, the Mothman swooped down, its talons grazing Hale's arm. Blood splattered, and he fell to the ground, writhing in pain. Jake and Emma could only watch in horror as the creature disappeared into the night, leaving them with the haunting echo of its cry. Hale's wound festered, a dark, inky substance spreading from the gash. Emma frantically tried to recall ancient texts and legends, searching for a way to stop the curse. Jake, torn between disbelief and fear, could only watch as the sheriff's condition worsened. Old Man Harris's words echoed in Jake's mind. "It's about what it makes you see." He realized the truth. Hale was being consumed by his worst fears, the Mothman feeding on his terror. Desperate, they decided to confront the entity. Returning to the TNT area, they prepared a makeshift ritual, using the symbols Emma had studied. The night was deathly quiet, the air charged with anticipation. As they began the ritual, the Mothman appeared, its form more terrifying than ever. It seemed to grow larger, feeding off their fear. The ground trembled, and the air grew thick with a sense of impending doom. In a final act of desperation, Emma invoked an ancient incantation, her voice trembling. The Mothman shrieked, its form flickering. For a moment, it seemed to weaken, but then it lunged at them with unimaginable fury. Jake and Emma were thrown to the ground, their vision blurring. The last thing Jake saw was the Mothman's glowing eyes, filled with an insatiable hunger for fear and death. Jake awoke to the sound of rustling leaves and the faint, oppressive chill of dawn. His head pounded, and his vision swam as he tried to sit up. The air was thick with a cloying mist, and the oppressive silence was only broken by the distant cry of a bird. Emma lay a few feet away, unconscious but breathing. Sheriff Hale was nowhere to be seen. "Emma, wake up," Jake croaked, his voice hoarse. He crawled over to her, gently shaking her shoulder. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open, and she sat up, clutching her head. "Where's Hale?" she asked, her voice filled with dread. "I don't know. We have to find him," Jake replied, his eyes scanning the dark treeline. As they stumbled through the woods, a sense of growing dread settled over them. The trees seemed to close in, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to snare them. Finally, they found Hale, collapsed against a tree, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "The curse! It's killing me," he gasped, his eyes wide with terror. "You have to end this. Find the source, the legend says." Before he could finish, his body convulsed violently, and a sickening crack echoed through the forest. His eyes rolled back, and he slumped forward, lifeless. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "We're running out of time. We have to find the source of the Mothman's power." Emma and Jake returned to the abandoned church on the outskirts of Point Pleasant, where they had discovered ancient texts and journals documenting the town's dark history. Emma pored over the fragile pages, her eyes scanning for any clue that might help them defeat the Mothman. "Here," she said, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. "There's a mention of an ancient ritual. It was used to banish malevolent spirits and creatures. It requires a personal sacrifice." Jake's stomach churned. What kind of sacrifice? Emma's eyes were grim. "A life willingly given. It's the only way to sever the Mothman's connection to this world." Silence hung heavy between them as they processed the gravity of the situation. They had come too far to turn back, and the lives of countless people depended on their success. "I'll do it," Jake said finally, his voice steady. "I'll be the sacrifice." "No," Emma replied firmly. "We'll find another way. There has to be another way." But deep down, they both knew the truth. As night fell once more, they prepared for the ritual, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. The old church was a hollow shell, its stained glass windows shattered and its pews rotting. Emma and Jake stood in the center of the dilapidated sanctuary, the air thick with tension. Emma carefully arranged the ritual components, a circle of salt, candles, and a silver dagger inscribed with ancient runes. As midnight approached, the air grew colder, and the oppressive darkness seemed to press in from all sides. They could feel the Mothman's presence, a malevolent force lurking just beyond the veil of reality. Jake stepped into the circle, his face resolute. "Do it, Emma. We don't have much time." With tears streaming down her face, Emma began the incantation, her voice trembling but determined. The candles flickered, and the air seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy. The ground shook, and the Mothman appeared, its form more monstrous and terrifying than ever. It let out a blood-curdling screech, and the surrounding shadows seemed to writhe and twist. Emma continued the incantation, her voice growing stronger as she approached the final words. In a desperate, final act, Jake took the silver dagger and plunged it into his chest, his eyes never leaving Emma's. "Finish it," he gasped, his voice weak. Emma's scream echoed through the church as she completed the incantation. The Mothman shrieked, its form flickering and distorting. The ground trembled violently, and the air was filled with an overwhelming pressure. Then, with a final, deafening roar, the Mothman was sucked into a swirling vortex of darkness. The candles extinguished, and the oppressive weight lifted. Silence fell, broken only by Emma's sobs as she cradled Jake's lifeless body. The dawn broke over Point Pleasant, casting a pale, uncertain light over the town. The Mothman was gone, banished by Jake's sacrifice, but the scars it left behind were deep. Emma stood at the edge of the Silver Bridge, looking out over the river. She felt a sense of peace, but also a profound loss. Sheriff Hale was buried with honors, and the townspeople began to rebuild, their hope slowly returning. But the legend of the Mothman would never be forgotten, a dark reminder of the thin veil between our world and the horrors that lurk just beyond. As Emma turned to leave, she thought she saw a flicker of red in the distance, a fleeting shadow against the morning sky. She couldn't be sure, but a chill ran down her spine. The Mothman's curse was lifted, but some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. Months passed, and life in Point Pleasant slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Emma dedicated herself to documenting the events, hoping to provide a comprehensive account for future generations. But despite the town's recovery, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Mothman's presence still lingered. One evening, as she pored over her notes, a knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Old Man Harris standing there, his eyes filled with a grim determination. "It's not over," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The ritual wasn't complete. The Mothman isn't gone. It's just dormant." Emma's heart sank. "What do you mean? We did everything the text said." Harris shook his head. "The Mothman feeds on fear and death. As long as there's fear in this town, it will always have a foothold here. You need to find a way to banish it completely." Determined to end the nightmare once and for all, Emma delved deeper into her research. She uncovered a forgotten text that spoke of a final, more powerful ritual, a ritual that required confronting the Mothman in its own realm, a place between life and death, shadow and substance. She gathered the remaining pieces for the ritual, including a rare, ancient artifact, the Eye of Nyx, said to allow the bearer to see and navigate the otherworldly realm. Emma knew she couldn't do it alone. She reached out to a few trusted friends, forming a small group willing to face the unknown with her. On the night of the new moon, they gathered at the site of the Silver Bridge. The air was electric with anticipation and fear. Emma held the Eye of Nyx tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. As they began the incantation, the air grew colder, and a thick fog enveloped them. The world around them seemed to dissolve, and they found themselves standing in a strange, shadowy landscape. The sky was a swirling vortex of darkness, and the ground was covered in a thick, black mist. In the distance, they saw the Mothman, its form towering and grotesque. Its eyes burned with an unholy light as it watched them approach. Emma felt a wave of terror wash over her, but she pressed on, knowing this was their only chance. They formed a circle, holding hands and chanting the final part of the ritual. The Eye of Nyx glowed brightly, illuminating the darkness. The Mothman let out a deafening screech and charged at them, its wings beating furiously. Just as it reached them, a blinding light erupted from the Eye of Nyx, enveloping the Mothman and the entire shadowy realm. The creature writhed and shrieked, its form dissolving into the light. The ground shook violently, and Emma felt herself being pulled back to the real world. Emma awoke on the edge of the Silver Bridge, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. Her friends lay around her, dazed but alive. The air was crisp and clear, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. The town of Point Pleasant began to heal, the shadow of the Mothman lifting. The legend would remain, but now it was a story of courage and sacrifice, a testament to the strength of those who faced the darkness and prevailed. Emma stood at the edge of the bridge, looking out over the river. She knew that the fight was over, but the memories would stay with her forever. As she turned to leave, she felt a warm breeze on her face, carrying with it a sense of hope and renewal. The Mothman was gone, banished to the void from which it came. The town of Point Pleasant could finally move forward, free from the terror that had haunted it for so long. And Emma, with the weight of the past lifted, could look to the future with hope and determination. The Mothman's reign of terror had ended, but its story would live on, a reminder of the thin line between our world and the darkness that lies beyond.